It's such an honor for me to be here at the second Land Arab Conference to open the consultation for the Land Flagship report of the World Bank. It is my pleasure to welcome the participant to the roundtable dedicated to these consultations, which is a part of a broader analytical program that we are leading from the Chief Economist Office of the Middle East and North Africa region at the World Bank, which I've just joined a few actually weeks or just a couple of months ago as the new Chief Economist. I'm particularly glad that we have the opportunity to consult ongoing work. This is not a dissemination. This is really work that is happening as we speak with such a distinguished and diverse audience of stakeholders that range from political makers, practitioners, policymakers, practitioners, civil society, and academics. And this diversity of perspective is particularly important to us. There has been a lot of discussion that has taken place over the past 2 days on the importance of land in the region. And to a large extent, the emerging messages that we see are aligned to what we have seen in other analytical work, that the difficulties of businesses and households face vis-a-vis land are difficulties that have to do with access and exerting property rights over land. And these barriers to access land are really detrimental to investment and job creation, which we know is a key priority in the recovery from the COVID crisis. And these challenges also reflect different margins of inequality. And we know that it is notable that women face significant challenges in asserting their property and inheritance rights on land. Talking about land in the MENA region is a critical thing. Continuing with systems and practices that perpetuate inefficient and inequitable land use bears significant cost that is not sustainable in the long run. And we need to address these land challenges now, given the climate change and demographic pressures that the world and the region face. One of the unfortunate facts that we face as a team working on land, but also that we see across the region, is the dearth of data and research available to support a deeper understanding of the question of land and evidence-based policy debate. And we aim with our report not only to highlight these gaps, but to try to fill some of these knowledge gaps. Our consultation today is an opportunity to listen to your view and gather feedback that will be precious for us to continue and complete our work. And gathering this feedback is all the more important because land issues are complex, they are cross-sectional, and affect all aspects of society. As a neoclassically trained economist, after having worked on land, I will never ever say that this is the fixed capital, this is the fixed asset. There is so much that can happen to improve land. We're planning a couple of sub-regional workshops down the line, but this is the very first time that we're coming out to such a broad and diverse audience to consult. We're very fortunate to have our colleague Wael Zakut, who is the Senior Technical Advisor and Global Lead for Land and Geospatial in the World Bank, to guide us through this discussion. Wael has worked for the World Bank for more than 25 years, holding several positions, including being country manager for Yemen, and being involved and leading and shaping the land agenda for the World Bank and the modernization of property rights systems over these years. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the privilege of listening to your thoughts and picking your brain. And over to you, Wael.
Okay, excellent, Roberta. Thank you very much, and I would like to welcome, all of you, both in Cairo as well as around the world, connecting to us, virtually, on this very important session. As Roberta mentioned, is the first, round of consultations on the regional flagship report on land. And many of you probably heard me before, talking about the importance of land issues, both for the economic development, for social inclusion, for private sector, for many aspects of the economy. And probably more important in Arab region than any other place, for issues we all know. So because of this, we decided in the World Bank to do a regional study. We started about a year and a half ago, to really looking at the broader dimension of land, how it's linked to the land tenure security, how it's supported the various sectors of the economy, linked to growth agenda as well as job creation. We'll also we'll be touching on this and some of the social issues like the women land rights, making sure that women get their their rightful right with regard to inheritance as well as owning property, and also issues related to land and conflict, which is we have seen recent years greater displacement as a result of the sad events which has happened in the MENA region. We will be hearing from the lead authors of the report today, Ms. Anna Corsi. Many of you know her. She chaired the high-level session on the land administration yesterday, and I think today she also chaired one of the technical sessions, as well as Mr. Harris Sillog, who is the senior economist working on the research department, working together with Anna on this report. So let's hear from them first, and then we'll open it, for discussion by the audience. Please, Anna or Harris, who wants to start first?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I think I've shared the presentation, so I hope all of you can see it.
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. Sorry, give me 1 second. I want to change the view. Oops, sorry. Because it's blocking my presentation. 1 second. Okay. So thank you very much. Well, so I will start indeed the presentation, then my colleague Harris Sillog will continue. So it's a pleasure for us today to be sharing with you the summary of the preliminary findings on the report on land issues in the Middle East and North Africa region that, as Roberta well mentioned, we are currently preparing. So today we'll go over the objectives of the report, and then we'll look into some of the analysis and findings regarding the land scarcity in MENA, land governance in MENA, and also what we see as some of the policy challenges. And in fact, these are the sort of the 3 pillars of the study that we have. We'll go over the conclusions, and then we'll have some questions for the audience to open up the discussion. So the objectives of the reports we see as the report has 3 objectives mainly. So it aims to identify what are the physical and governance challenges that we see in the land sector in MENA, and the resulting economic, environmental, and social impacts. The study also is an attempt to have a comprehensive assessment of what are the land issues in the MENA region, and using research to guide the policy dialogue. And thirdly, as Roberta also mentioned, the reports contributes to filling what we see is a huge data gap on land issues in the region. This shows the conceptual framework of the study. At the core of it is the idea that land is used inefficiently in the region. And the main sort of 2 main factor for it is the fact that, there are physical constraints, and as we'll see specifically, scarcity of land, of suitable land in the regions on one side. On the other side, there are institutional constraints and due mostly to weak land governance is in place. Policies, also contribute to some extent to not having the most efficient use of land in the region, though, there are also policies that are aimed to address the same issues. And as we see, the fact that, of this inefficiency have economic and social costs for the economies in the region. So the first pillar, as I mentioned, is land scarcity in the region. So when we look at land in MENA, we see that it's mostly desert. It's more than 84% is desert. Cropland is very limited, it's only 3.5%. And as you can see from this graph, this is really in stark contrast to what we see is the situation in the other regions of the world. So suitable land is not only scarce, but we see the cropland is also decreasing. So this sort of table shows you that, it's data from over 15-year period from 2003 to 2018. We see that, during this period, there are movements in and out of cropland in the region. We see that, in some cases, some areas, cropland is increasing, in some areas is decreasing. But the overall effect is that there is a loss of 2.5% of cropland in the region over this period of time. When we look at population growth, is a 2% increase per year, and this will continue to raise the demand for land, both for food production and for housing. And these two graphs show you, again, there is a decrease in the availability of agricultural land in the MENA region, whereas, urban expansions, there's more demand for land. When we look then at the land governance in the MENA region, when we look at the legal frameworks, if we see it's a fairly complex legal framework, and it's the results of the accumulation of different laws, practices, and policies that we've seen, through the historical periods. That have taken into consideration, of course, religious Islamic principles, also the existing of, norms and practices. And clearly, we see that, the Ottoman land law has had an influence, still very wide present in many of these countries. Of course, there are also some exceptions. The specificity, of the colonial state is that they've introduced a tight list system in support of private property. And that, with independent states, we see the characteristics that they have reduced the religious endowments. We see today still 5 main categories of tenures, as I mentioned, that we started to see with the Ottoman law. They're still, valid today in many of these countries. And so mostly, we see private land, we see state land, we see the Waqf land, and some other minor sort of type of tenure systems. So laws, it's been mentioned also, during the conference, laws are outdated. This doesn't help, in managing land efficiently. There are many ambiguities and conflicting interpretation. There's a complexity of tenure situation that is also a source of tensions and weakens the ability to manage and to administer land efficiently. Changes in regime that have also been a source of tensions. The really clear characteristics that we see in the MENA region is that the state has a major role in the land sector, and as a role that has consistently grown, that was strengthened after independence. So if one side central state institution have really strong control over land, we see the local authority have on the opposite side have usually narrow mandates overall. This graph shows that so not only the state controls a large share of the land in the region, but is also a major landowner, especially if we see compared to the other regions in the world. The picture to your right is an example from Algeria. And it shows how, for example, military land, is quite present, in prime urban location. What we see is that, the really strong land control over land in the region that is coupled with poor governance can facilitate elite capture. This graph correlates the protection of property rights from the Bretton Woods Transformation Index together with, weak governance, and we see, in fact, there is a correlation. So if the weaker the governance on land, the weaker also the protection of property rights. And this is true, as we see, of course, for the world and for the MENA region as well. On the institutional side, I think we've heard it also quite a bit during the conference, institutional fragmentation, many different institutions that have mandate over land, which creates, of course, a lack of coordination and duplication of efforts, and therefore inefficiency in the management of land. So when we look more specifically at the land administration through the doing business indicators of registering property, which measure the efficiency and the quality of the land administration, efficiency in terms of the time and cost and the number of procedures that are needed to register. What we see is that only a few MENA countries are really at the top, while several still remains at the bottom of the distribution. When we look more specifically, the indicator on the quality of land administration, which looks at the reliability, the transparency, and the coverage of land administration, as well as the protection against land disputes and equal access, we have a very similar picture. With most of the MENA country, there are still low performers, though there are a few exceptions, again, at the top. And Jordan in particular, we're seeing has made very, considerable progress regarding this indicator over the years. We can zoom in also a little bit more into the doing business indicators and looking at the coverage. So, whether the plots are registered and mapped. And again, similar results. We see that most MENA countries are low performers, again, with a few exceptions at the top. This graph shows you that we've correlated GDP per capita with the quality of land administration index from the doing business. And we see the richer and smaller country in the region seems to do better. And this is probably due to the higher capacity and the limited number of transactions in those countries. Access to land by firms is also an issue in the country, and it is perceived as such, as a major or severe constraint to several firms in the region. This data is a little bit older than the other data from 2009, but you can see in the gray columns are the countries in the MENA region compared to other countries in the world. And as you see, for several countries, this remains true. Access to land is a constraint. When we look at access to land and political connections, we have data, for example, from Morocco and Tunisia, and we see that the firms that are politically connected seem to have less problems in accessing land than those that are not connected. And in fact, this shows that it is quite common for the firms in the region to be politically connected. Women's rights to land and access to land, very important issues that has been discussed during this conference. This graph shows that, in the law, how much, women's are, have equal property ownership and inheritance rights. This graph shows the MENA region is the blue line at the bottom, the flat line, compared to the other regions in the world. And we see that MENA has the lowest ranking in terms of equal property ownership and inheritance rights for women. As you can see, all other regions have improved over time, while MENA has stagnated. We have carried out a pilot project in Palestinian to look at, in practice, what happens when we talk about women's housing, land, and property rights. And the results show that, in fact, women are less likely than men to own land at the time of their passing. It's quite common for them to renounce the share of inheritance and are not fairly compensated, when they don't receive it. This is data from the PRINDEX, so perception of tenure securities, data from very recent data from 2020. We have here for Morocco, Jordan, and Tunisia. And again, we see that women fear losing their land, so they feel, insecure about the land tenure in the hands of, the event of the husband's death, much more than the men do. And this graph shows the sort of overall, when we have, good quality of land administrations, there's also, a higher gender equality index. And so there's this two graphs shows basically this correlation. So, countries where there are higher scores of quality of administration have less gender inequality overall. Disputes is another important issue. There are several disputes that are related to lands. The main ones are those that are regarding completing claims of ownership, be it between private parties between a private and the public and the state, inheritance and women's rights, and also the irregular land use, so the informality and the squatting problem that we see in those countries. In some of these countries, actually, the share of land disputes is quite high compared, to the overall share of disputes in civil courts. So as we can see here, for example, in Palestine, 90%, Lebanon, 70%, Algeria, 13%. And we've also looked at 50 years of Palestinian court cases where, it shows that there's a really high incidence of disputes that revolve around power of attorneys. And this is because there's not an efficient registration in place, proof of ownership, divisional ownership. So it remains a problem. Let me hand it over to Harris now. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Anna. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen? Can you please
Not
confirm?
yet, Harris.
Not yet?
We don't see it yet.
Then let me try again. Share screen.
Yes, it's coming now.
All right. Thank you very much. So let me now say a few words about the policy challenges. So based on what Anna has just presented, we've identified a set of 7 policy challenges in the MENA region. They're not probably the only policy challenges, of course, but they're the ones that we believe are quite prevalent in a number of MENA countries, and they're also quite strategic to address. So let me start with policy challenge number 1. The issue is how to mobilize revenue from land. In fact, when you look at the left...
Sorry, this is Roberta. We see 2 slides, so you should probably switch the display setting.
Okay,
on top?
Yes, on top of the PowerPoint?
Yeah, on top of the PowerPoint, display setting.
Hold on,
and switch view.
Okay, displays. Let me be... I'm a bit confused here.
Yes. So do you see something? Do you see a black screen? On top, there are show taskbar.
I see the slideshow in the PowerPoint or in the Zoom?
I see it in the Zoom. Once you get to the next screen.
Okay. Here, display settings.
Yes, display setting. Click there and swap. Click. Perfect. Right. We see one slide. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Sorry about the little technical issue here. So I was saying that the first big challenge we think for the region is how to mobilize revenues from land. If you look at the left-hand side graph here, it shows you the property tax revenue as a percentage of GDP in a number of countries. So they are, the MENA average is the orange vertical bar, and you can see that it's lower than in other regions. Of course, there is some heterogeneity. Some MENA countries do better than others, but there's an issue here of not taxing property. In fact, there's a tradition of not taxing property, and it leads to foregone revenues. But there's also the issue of having an unfair taxation system, in the sense that you don't have progressive taxation. You don't have the richest, which pay more tax than the less rich. Of course, it should be recognized that in contexts where you have low registration coverage, difficult valuation of land, and when it happens, it's not really based on market values, then it makes property taxation all the more difficult. Property taxation can also be a politically sensitive issue, although some MENA countries do tax real estate transactions. So what we've seen, and it's an interesting development, is that some Gulf countries actually are going in the direction of changing the tax system. This can be possibly correlated to the drying up of the oil revenues and the need for diversification of revenues. So there are a few examples here. Saudi Arabia is one of them. So that's policy challenge number one. Let me say a few words about policy challenge number two. This one is about enabling land markets. In fact, if you look at land administration and land management in MENA countries, it seems that there's a general principle of disregarding market mechanisms. There's also lack of transparency regarding market information in general, with a few exceptions. And maybe an illustration of this is the limited size of the mortgage markets, which hinder actually transactions and investments. The graph that you can see on the right-hand side of the slide shows mortgage loans as percentage of GDP in several MENA countries. And you see, of course, there's here again a big variation, across countries, but some countries are doing okay, but others are not doing well at all. Now, policy challenge number three. How do we promote land use that is efficiently mobilized, efficient land use? There are several issues here. One is that of how do we manage public land efficiently? And there are several challenges. There's the fact that allocation mechanisms, allocation of the land, are sometimes disconnected from markets. There's the issue also that many countries engage in redistribution policies. Of course, it's a continuation of traditional allocation in Arab states, and it's part of the implicit social contract, so it's important. But it often happens outside land management and outside development objectives. Public land is not managed efficiently also for the delivery of public and social purposes and for generation, as I was saying. And a very important observation to make is that local authorities and population are almost never involved in land use planning. There's the issue of land and housing informality, which was presented by other presenters during the conference. And there's this interesting point of vacant land, which is sitting idle, both vacant land and vacant residential units in urban areas of several MENA countries. And only a few countries are addressing this issue. One example is Saudi Arabia, I think Kuwait as well, through empty land taxation. Let me show you here a graph of what happened in Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia realized they needed to unlock this idle land in its cities. And they announced in 2013 that they would come up with a policy of taxing idle land, which they started implementing in 2016. What we see here and what we show is a total area transacted in 4 Saudi Arabian cities that were targeted by the policy. And there has been an anticipation of holders of empty land before the taxation took place to get rid of that empty land, which was sold on the market. And this is what the graph is showing. Now, let me talk about policy challenge 4. An important issue, of course, is how to manage agricultural land. And there are several issues proper to the MENA context. One is land fragmentation, which is observed in quite a few countries. It's stemming from redistribution policies, inheritance issues, and it's a problem for productivity, for mobilizing efficient mobilization of the agricultural land assets. There's the issue that was mentioned also this morning in another session of peri-urban agricultural land, which is lost to urban expansion. That's the case, for instance, in Egypt. But it's raising a number of issues, whether and how to actually protect that peri-urban agricultural land. There are, of course, issues related to the sustainability of land cultivation in a context where water is also scarce. And subsidies to agriculture somehow, although they comply with no objective of food independence, they also tend to promote unsustainable land cultivation at the expense of water resources. So this is just to tell you that there are some trade-offs actually that have to be made when one talks about managing land and especially agricultural land. So I mentioned the issue of water conservation that needs to be weighed against the issue of food dependence, food security. Some countries have responded to this challenge, mainly Gulf countries, by investing actually abroad, purchasing large tracts of land for large-scale agriculture abroad, but this has created tensions over land and water in the destination countries. Let me maybe illustrate this trade-off with the case of Saudi Arabia again. So Saudi Arabia became aware that it had to come up with a water preservation policy. And in 2008, they decided to ban the production of wheat, actually, which is consuming a lot of water. What you see on those two graphs is when the areas under wheat crop decreased, the response was food imports of wheat shooting up. So this illustrates the type of trade-offs that the countries are facing, and the resolution is not an easy one. Now, policy challenge 5. How do we respond to urban needs? It's a priority in many countries. There's a lot of social housing also. But the problem here is that the interventions often do not consider implications in terms of spatial development and long-term sustainability of land use. There are issues associated with slums and informality that were discussed a lot in the conference. It is somehow related to weak land governance. Local governments have very little control over urban sprawl, and this informality, the slums are raising important challenges in terms of infrastructure service delivery, as we all know. What is interesting here is that it's very difficult to solve the specific land tenure issue, the property right issues for upgrading and redevelopment. So some countries choose actually to build new development outside the actual built up. Of course, there can be complementary policies, in upgrading and building elsewhere, but this also raises, issues of how land is being mobilized. Firms also face difficulties to access land. Anna showed very interesting results in this respect. There have been some policies trying to facilitate access of land to firms. An example is the creation of industrial zones with, let's say, limited success, or some success, but not always. Here's an example of the 6th of October industrial zone in Egypt. You can see that at its inception, the zone which was built outside the city in the desert was quite empty, and in 2015 is pretty much full. So this is an example of a zone that managed to actually attract industries, but they are not all like this one. Policy challenge 6, Anna mentioned the issue of women and vulnerable population. So she has said how access to land remains problematic for women, and this of course needs to be addressed. There's the issue of refugees. So the displacement from conflict has really occurred at a very large scale over the past decade in MENA. We currently have 12.5 million internally displaced people in the region, and 7.3 million refugees actually come from MENA countries, mostly Syria and Iraq. So there's support that is really needed to guarantee the HLP rights of this population, and this has been also addressed, of course, in the conference. This is needed in both destination and origin areas in the perspective of the return of refugees. And this policy challenge 7 is actually related to the previous one, is the fact that we need to reconstruct and recover from those conflicts, because conflicts actually affect land use. Here's an example below where we're showing the border between Syria and Turkey. So Syria to the south and Turkey to the north. And you can see that the land that was cropped in 2009 basically was not cropped anymore in 2016. So there has been destruction, abandonment of cropland in the conflict impacted area. And to the contrary, you see that there's actually been an increase in Turkey. So somehow there's been some displacement, not only of population, but also of the production out of Syria into Turkey. So I will conclude very quickly so we can have much more time for the discussion. Let me just say 3 things that we think are important that summarize our thinking. First, there's a lot of stress on land. So land is a key economic asset. It is scarce, but at the same time, there's increasing demand for land from demographic projections, from urban expansion, from climate change, and even stress from conflicts. So there's a physical problem, associated with scarcity of land in the region. The second point is that land governance is in quite a few places weak, and it prevents the use of the land to be efficient. It holds back the economy. It inhibits strategic decisions that need to be made over the trade-offs that I talked about. It prevents from responding to population needs, such as housing, and the need also for food security. And finally, we believe that the economic and social inequalities are also reflected, in women and vulnerable groups that face persistent difficulties in accessing land, and those groups should be prioritized for policies. So let me stop here, and I will give back the floor to Wael.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Harris and Anna, for very interesting presentation. So let's have a conversation, among all of us, both on, in Cairo, but also virtually. I would like just to ask you if there is any question, or comment. There are three things which is we would like to ask, as part of this conversation. One is whether the issues we identified, Anna and Harris presented, are the right issues, and whether the analysis, the underpinning analysis makes sense to you. And finally, did we miss any very important issues you feel that somehow, the presentation did not capture? So let's, let's have the conversation. Eleanor is helping us in Cairo. So if Eleanor, we'll start with you if there is any comments or questions from the floor there, and then just will come virtually here, around the world.
Thank you, Wael. We will pass the floor to our attendees here in Cairo now.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تلقيت رسالة من الأستاذة أنا للإجابة عن بعض هذه الأسئلة فيما يتعلق بحالة السودان. سأحاول أن نجملها في عجالة. تحديات الوصول للأرض لغرض السكن والاستثمار من التحديات التي تواجهها أسعار الأرض التي بها خدمات مرتفعة جدا، الانتظار الطويل للحصول على الأرض من الحكومة، والنزاع مع المجتمع المحلي في حالات الاستثمار. عفوا، أنا صلاح أبو كشوة من السودان، لم أقدم نفسي. أما ما يتعلق بالمرأة فهناك متحديات مجتمعية خاصة في الأرض التي تدار عبر المجتمع. القانون والدستور يعطي المرأة حقا متساويا، ولكن في المجتمع هناك الكثير من الممارسات التي لم تمنع المرأة حقها المتساوي مع الرجل. فيما يتعلق بتحديات معلومات الأرض فأغلبها عدم إتاحة المعلومات وعدم توفرها. بالنسبة لتحديات التسجيل والتقنين، أكثرها أن في بعض الأحيان التسجيل والتقنين يتجاوز قيمة الأرض نفسها بسبب عمليات المسح المكلفة للأرض والوصول إليها، فتصبح التكلفة عالية جدا. الوصول إلى التمويل أيضا يرتبط بالتسجيل، وبالتالي كثير من الناس في السودان لا يستطيعون الوصول إلى التمويل عبر الأرض أو تمويل الأرض نفسها. أما أخذ العائدات من الأرض فهو ضعيف جدا لأسباب سياسية ولأسباب تقنية، حيث لا تتوفر معلومات عن هذه الأرض. فيما يتعلق بتجزئة الأرض الزراعية، هذا الأمر قلل كثيرا من الفائدة من الأرض، وأدى إلى تحول أغراض كثير من الأرض الزراعية خاصة القريبة من المدن تتحول إلى المسكن دون تخطيط كلي يشمل احتياجات المزارع والأمن الغذائي للمدن. في السياسات الحالية لمقابلة هذه التحديات هناك سماح تم قبل يومين بتسجيل الأرض صغيرة المساحة في المدينة، وبالتالي يستطيع الناس أن يبنوا رأسيا ويقللوا من استخدامات الأرض المساحات الكبيرة. قانون عمره 100 عام كان يمنع تسجيل الأرض لا تقل عن 200 متر مربع. الآن أول أمس صدر قانون يسمح بتسجيل الأرض التي تبلغ مساحتها 100 متر. أيضا هناك اقتراب شيئا ما من النظام الأهلي ومحاولات لاستيعابه داخل النظام الرسمي. هناك أيضا بدايات لبناء مؤسسات لسياسات الأرض مثل المفوضية القومية للأراضي التي أنشئت في 2018 العام 2018، ولكن ما زالت تحتاج إلى الكثير من العمل حتى تتحرك. أما أولويات إعادة تشكيل الأرض في السودان لاند ريفورم، فهناك حاجة كبيرة للإسراع في استيعاب النظام الأهلي حتى نغطي مساحة أكبر وعدد أكبر من الناس في النظام المسجل. أيضا نحتاج إلى اعتماد طرق للتخريط والمابينج أقل كلفة، ونتوجه نحو ضرائب الأرض واستخداماتها المختلفة. أخيرا فيما يتعلق بالمعلومات، معلومات الأرض المسجلة هي موجودة ولكنها غير متاحة وغير مكتملة وليس من السهل الوصول إليها. معلومات الأرض عن المرأة وتسجيلها المرأة غير متاح. المعلومات المكانية في السودان، الخرائط ومعلومات الكادستر، أغلبها قديم جدا وغير شامل حتى للمناطق الجديدة وغير متكامل مع المعلومات الأخرى من حيث اسم المالك ونوعية الاستخدام، إضافة إلى عدم الدقة. التوبوغرافيك ماب التي تغطي السودان عمرها أكثر من 40 عاما، لم يحدث تجديد للتوبوغرافيك ماب في السودان. أما عن استخدامات وخرائط الاستخدامات فهي تمر بنفس الوضع، حيث قدمها وعدم شموليتها وعدم تكاملها إضافة إلى عدم دقتها. هناك أيضا تحدي كبير جدا، معلومات الأرض للاجئين الذين تحركوا من أرضهم في دارفور وفي مناطق كثيرة من السودان. لا توجد معلومات دقيقة عن مكان هؤلاء الناس وأرضهم القديمة وكيفية عودتهم إلى أرضهم. نقترح أن يكون هناك تعاون كبير بين البنك الدولي والتغيير الذي يحدث الآن في السودان في صنع السياسات تجاه الأرض، التعاون مع مختلف المؤسسات الأرض مثل التحالف الدولي للأرض أو بريندكس الآن لديها محاولة أنها تدخل السودان لتغطي حقوق الملكية في السودان بدراسة، وكذلك الانترناشونال لاند كواليشن ليس لها وجود حالي في السودان، ولكن يمكن أن نصل إلى بعض المعلومات المفيدة ومنها نبدأ إلى صناعة السياسات في السودان. شكرا جزيلا.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much. So let's collect maybe 2-3 comments or questions from the floor, before we go to Anna and Harris, and then we'll go for sure. Okay, Eleanor, do we have more comments?
We don't have further comments or questions from the floor.
Okay, so since we don't have, let's go to Shahid, I think virtually. Shahid, you raise your hand, please. Go ahead. Shahid, can you hear me? We can't hear you.
He needs to be given speaker rights. Well, I think, Eleonora, can you please help with that?
Hi, Wael. Thank you very much.
Okay, please go ahead, Shahid.
Well, I would like, first of all, to thank everyone, the organizers and the panelists for such great input. I would also like to thank Egypt for welcoming us during this crisis with the pandemic in their land and carrying on all these efforts to have everyone virtually and in person. In answer to the question that was at the end of the presentation, we have all the land issues that anyone can imagine in the Arab region, and I will try to sum the 3 main issues, which are the challenges in accessing housing, the challenges for women to access land rights. These 2 issues need to be tackled as soon as possible. And these 2 issues are showing us through Prindex data, through other data like the women business and law data, that they are affecting the tenure security. The fact that the limited number of housing that are available in the market is a big drive for the people in the region, whether refugees or renters, to settle with insecure tenure arrangements, as well as for the women issue to access land. We have seen yesterday and today that the women are facing tremendous issues, not only through inheritance, but also through sharing property with their husbands. And that was also reflected in so many data that were presented in the conference. We also have the problem of accessibility to information on land. In this point, we have to make something clear. We have a scarcity of information in the Arab region, not lack of accessibility. Lack of accessibility comes next, which is also a problem, but we have lack of information. We don't have a mechanism of information collection in the region. We don't have a body that oversees the collection of information and sharing it between the different public bodies. And we have the problem of having no statistics that we can rely on. All these problems regarding information point us towards, as researchers, as policy makers, as professionals that are trying to make some policy recommendations, rely only on external resources to back up our recommendations. We rely on data from the World Bank, we rely on data from Prindex, we rely on data from Landex, because we don't have statistics and reliable information coming from our land registries, which is a problem that can be solved through modernization. We also have law in almost all Arabic countries that permit the access to information, and it's the right of every citizen in every Arabic country. But yet, this law is not implemented in any of the Arab countries, and when it's implemented for a very small group of people and not for everyone. Thank you very much, Wael. Back to you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Shahid. So let's maybe collect one more question, and then we go to Anna. Anything from the floor? I see a hand. Amazing, I can see it from here. Please go ahead.
Excuse me.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes, please. سمير أحمد البلعزي، رئيس مصلحة أملاك الدولة ليبيا. الحقيقة ما أريد أن أتحدث عنه هو بالنسبة لحشد الإيرادات الخاصة بالأراضي في ليبيا، عدم وجود نظام لإدارة السوق العقارية بشكل عام من خلال الدولة أدى إلى خلل في ذلك لعدم وجود مرجعية لأسعار الأرض الخاصة. أما بالنسبة للأراضي العامة ما يوجد هو ممانعة أو ما يمنع التنازل على ملكية الرقبة للدولة أو من الدولة، وبالتالي يمكن التنازل عنها لملكية حق الانتفاع فقط لسنوات محددة، ثم إعادة الأرض وما عليها إلى الدولة، وهذا نظام مشابه لنظام الBOT. النقطة الثانية عدم استخدام الأرض بكفاءة أكبر في كل المناطق الحضرية والريفية أو الزراعية، وذلك يرجع للأسباب التالية في بلادي على الأقل. وجود قوانين مانعة لذلك لعدم الاعتراف بالملكية الخاصة على الأقل في السابق، ولا زالت لحد الآن لم يتم تعديلها بشكل كامل، وبسط يد الدولة على الملكية العقارية والاعتراف بالملكية الواحدة، وبالتالي حظر تقسيم الأراضي للملكية الخاصة داخل المخططات المعتمدة وعرضها للبيع في السوق العقارية. هذا أدى إلى شح في العرض بخصوص تقاسيم الأراضي والأراضي الخاصة للبيع والمخططات أو التقسيمات المعتمدة. أما بالنسبة للأراضي الزراعية والريفية فقد أسند الاختصاص دون مصلحة التخطيط العمراني ودون المصالح المختصة، وإنما أسند لوزارة الزراعة، والتي قامت بوضع سياسات تقسيم أو تقزيم الأراضي الزراعية وبيع ملكية حق الانتفاع بها، والتي كان من المفترض أن تقوم الجهات التابعة لهذه الوزارة بمتابعتها وفسخ العقود المخالفة منها وإرجاع ملكية الدولة، ولكن للأسف أدى ذلك إلى هدر الأراضي الزراعية وتقسيمها بالمخالفة وبيعها للملكية الخاصة، مما أدى إلى التقليل من الأراضي الزراعية أو نسبة الأراضي الزراعية بالنسبة للمساحة الكلية لليبيا. شكرا، بارك الله فيكم.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So let's go to Anna and Harris for a quick response, and then we'll go for another round of questions and comments. Anna, Harris.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, we hear you now.
No, it's just I think it's very good for us to hear that the issues that we have identified and presented today, that they seem to be very much in line to what these the participants and to what the intervention that have been made today up until now. So we heard indeed the lack of markets. The problems of documentation, it's outdated. There's no information. There's no place to really find a reliable database and set of information. We've heard also about women's land rights. So I think it seems like we're very much in line and with what the issues are seen also from stakeholders in the region. So let me stop here for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Unless Harris, you want to say something?
Yes.
I'll
say something very quickly, because I think our main objective here is to hear from the audience regarding the specific issues that they are facing in their own countries or that they have knowledge of in the region. I'll just say that as Anna, I'm really pleased to see that our understanding of what's happening is shared by others. When we look at land issues, we can look at it from different perspectives. It can be looked at it from an agronomist perspective regarding the scarcity, productivity, climate change, etc. We can look at it from governance, land administration. We can also look at it from an economic perspective. And I think what's important to say is that many of the things that have been said here in terms of economics is also about restrictions that we have in terms of land market. And those are the hindrances that prevents the supply of the land to respond to the demand, whether it's an urban context or whether it's a rural context. So in an urban context, restricting the supply of land because land stays idle, because there's no good process to transfer public land to private land, make it available at scale, etc., contributes to increasing, the prices of formal development. It contributes to making informal development more prevalent. So it's really an issue. There's also issues in the rural sector. I think it was mentioned the conditionality, of land use. Sometimes it can pursue an objective. For instance, food independence, you have to grow, this particular type of thing. But if the land is allocated to someone who doesn't know how to grow this particular crop or to do, cattle raising, etc., we may not have the most efficient use of the land as well. So I think all those economic thinking has to, penetrate the thinking, I think, of, that is underpinning the policies in order to really understand what we are achieving through the different measures or existing practices that restrict the supply of the land.
Okay, excellent, Anna and Harris. So we will go one more round, but this round will be a little bit different. I would like to ask specific questions, if you can actually try to answer them, related to really the country you are from or the country you're aware of if you live somewhere else. So the first one is, what do you think the top key priority areas, or the top key issues, land issues, in the country, and whether the presentation really, somehow capture these, key issues. And I will suggest maybe one or two issues, per country. The second one is, what are the, whether these policy areas or issues are being addressed, in your country. I mean, whether it has been addressed in the past or the government, somehow is working on a mechanism to address these issues. And the third question, what reforms, in your view, should be prioritized for the future, in your country, and also related to these issues. And the final question clearly is, what really impediments, what did really stop the you and the government, to address these critical issues. You don't have to answer all of them, but maybe if you can just, when you speak, you can maybe, address one or two, of these questions. Let's go again to the floor. Eleanor, please help us with that, and then we'll go virtually later on. Okay, it looks like we don't have any question or comments from the floor. So let me go around virtually. I'm seeing lots of names I'm familiar with, who knows the region very well. So I would like maybe to hear from you if you have a comment or on the questions I mentioned. Just please open the microphone if you would like to speak, or you raise your hand. Okay, so I see two hands. Larissa, how are you doing? Please go ahead. And then we have Rafiq after that. And Dr. Arif afterwards. Okay, Clarissa.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you clearly. Please go ahead.
So one of the things that I've been hearing in the conference, and something that is definitely a very big issue in countries like Iraq, is that they have enormous amounts of law already in place. Also, the law is intended to service refugees or people coming back and so on, but it's so difficult to implement. And what we see is that in certain circumstances, the UN introduces transitional justice mechanisms, but then somehow those have to be incorporated in the law. And in some countries, we see a debate between international bodies as to we should be introducing new laws, whereas nationals are saying, no, let's work with what we've got. So this can become a major barrier to implementing reconstruction. So this is just something that I'm putting on the table. I don't say we have answers for, but it's something we need to think through. Thank you.
Excellent, Clarissa. This is a very important point. We face it, in fact, in few other places around the world, especially those who had some conflict and fragility. Okay, so I think Rafiq, I saw your hand. Please go ahead, Rafiq.
Thank you, Wael. I'm thinking loudly. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a final. Well, I'm gonna raise some issues, and then I'll share it with you if you don't mind. Obviously, when I heard the intervention of our Libyan colleague, I was very impressed by the whole. I mean, we say in French, bouleversement. I mean, the things have been transformed upside down in Libya because of the nationalization of all lands. I think maybe we should in the report talk a little bit about the adverse effects of such revolutions in between brackets, and also the adverse effects of war on land, not only on agriculture, on land tenure, and try to identify maybe mitigation processes or proposals to try to accompany in a transitional way the countries that would need maybe to set up a new land peace, if I may say. I think that Clarissa also has mentioned a very important point concerning Iraq, but Iraq has a lot of, obviously all the people who have made presentations from Iraq have a legal background. I was very impressed. They have a very important knowledge about their own laws. This is very interesting because you don't find this everywhere. So anyway, there is a lot to do in accompanying countries which are getting out of the crisis and mitigation the effect of the crisis, whatever the crisis is. Thank you. But I mean, this just a general remark. Yeah.
No, thank you, Rafiq. I mean, clearly, it's like, you know, in the comments mentioned 3 countries, you know, all of them related to some kind of, you know, displacement, conflict, nationalization. You mentioned the Libya example. Therefore, I think it's the Sudan and therefore displacement, and Iraq, the whole displacement issues after the conflict. Clearly, this is something really comes, you know, big and clear in the region, you know, where, you know, the conflict created, you know, certain dynamics on the land sector, you know, somehow probably need to be addressed, you know, and the, you know, the example I think is what Clarissa mentioned is, you know, having another law. I mean, there's a lot of debate. I mean, it's not just simply just having another law because the laws are not implemented, and then becomes the question is, you know, how, you deal with these issues, you know, with, you know, and to make sure that actually, you know, there is really practical interventions, you know, sometimes might require law, sometimes it's actually some other times may not need law, but just practical interventions. So I think we have also Dr.
Well, excuse me, we have an introduction for the floor, if you can allow.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I think Dr. Arif, I think you had your hand raised at one point. You would like to speak now?
Well,
yes.
Can you hear me from? Yeah, sorry, we have an intervention from the floor in Cairo, if you can allow.
Yeah, let's go to Dr. Arif first, and then we go, you know, to the floor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Actually, in Yemen, I want to present the land dispute in Yemen. Land dispute in Yemen is not an administrative issue. It is political issue related to the nature of the ruler. So in Yemen, there is military and tribal government. So to tackle any problem regarding the land, you have to go for the macro level reforms, not micro levels reforms. I mean, have land in Sana'a in Aden, majority of the land, majority of the city occupied by the military ruler. So how we can tackle such problem if we cannot find the national solution for all our problems? So this is the main issue. Second issue in Yemen regarding the gender discrimination against women in land ownership. Such religious group in Yemen, they deny totally rights of the women to own the land in the highest north in Yemen. So such religious, source of the gender gap cannot be tackled only through the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arif. I'm aware of Yemen, issues as you said it, and I think it's in Yemen, but also in many other places. Solution is not necessarily always, technical or legal. Sometimes it's political. I'm aware of much of the land which is provided for urban development in Sana'a, and probably in Aden as well, pass it through the military, and the military sells, the land to the to the people. You know, in big area, you know, Sana'a called Ali Mohsen, you know this, you know, which is, you know, the name of the commander of the army, because he's the one who took the land. It's a state land, and merely sold it to the people. You know, the women land right issue is clearly a very big issue. But actually, I'm surprised you say they deny, certain group, they deny women rights, because this is against Sharia law, Islamic law. And Islam was very clear, you know, on the women, you know, has legal rights of inheritance, you know, which is specify half, you know, of the share of the man. But probably clearly we need to discuss this further. Let's go to the floor. You know, we have, I think, a comment, you know, from the floor. Eleanor, please.
Yes, please, go ahead.
excuse me. أعتقد أن هناك عدم فهم بالملاحظة التي أشرت لها والملاحظات التي أشرت لها. هذه القوانين التي في بلد ليبيا هي ليست صنيعة بعد الثورات الربيع العربي، وإنما هي متأصلة منذ أكثر من 50 سنة تقريبا، وبالتحديد من بعد 1969 وهو التغيير الذي حدث من الملكية إلى الجمهورية، حيث ألغيت كافة القوانين في إعلان زوارة في سنة 1973، وأصبحت هناك تشريع جديد ينتج بعد هذا التاريخ، حيث وضع استراتيجية لتنفيذ سياسات اشتراكية في الدولة الليبية. الملكية للدولة دون غيرها هي التي تعطي حق الانتفاع للمواطن. الملكية واحدة للمواطن وليست جديدة بعد 2010. هذه جميعها قوانين سابقة، مثل القانون رقم 4 1978 يعطي حق السكن للشخص الواحد البالغ فقط. الأرض ليست ملكا لأحد وإنما ملكيتها للدولة. بعض القوانين الأخرى والتي جعلت الدولة منذ سنة 1973 إلى سنة 1992 في فراغ من التشريعات العقارية سوى القانون رقم 4 والقانون الأرض ليست ملكا لأحد. ثم صدر القانون 1192 له علاقة بالملكية العقارية، والتي حاول أن ينظم الفوضى التي كانت موجودة بالنسبة للتشريعات العقارية. أضف إلى ذلك كارثة حرق السجل العقاري والتي حدثت في شهر نوفمبر 1985. هذه الحادثة هي التي قضت على التسجيلات والملكيات التي كانت للمواطنين الملكيات الخاصة. وبعدها صدر قانون 1188 سنة 1988 والذي أنشأ مصلحة التسجيل العقاري مرة أخرى، وألزم الدولة والمواطن بأن يسجل خلال 2 وإذا لم يسجل سوف تكون الملكية أيضا للدولة. كل هذه التشريعات هي التي خلت أو جعلت الدولة في فوضى تشريعات عقارية. نأمل بعد ثورة الربيع العربي في ليبيا أن يتم تنظيم كل هذه التشريعات وإحقاقا للحق وإعطاء لكل حق ذي حقه، للدولة حقها وللمواطن حقه. شكرا.
Great, thank you very much. You know, this is very insightful for all of us. So let's maybe collect more comments and views from the floor.
There are no more intervention from the floor in Cairo. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So let's say virtually, Shahid, I see your hand. This is a legacy hand from before, or this is a new one?
It's the new one.
Oh, the new one. Okay, please go ahead.
So I want to talk about something completely different, which is, and I missed some of the presentation, just to make sure that it's in the thinking, is on pastoral rights and the importance of bringing that into a legal institutional regulatory framework. And of course, it's not simple, especially because there's so much pressure on pastoralists. A consideration to be thought about, which we have seen in, for instance, in South Sudan, is the creation of territorial agreements to manage conflict between farmers and pastoralists. Now, this leads to conversations that are not parcel-based, they're territory-based. And I don't know whether that is, that the pastoralist issue is under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Clarissa. I think this is very important, and I think it's probably also a related topic, I would say, is the traditional right, the Bedouin rights, tribal rights, and in many countries, are not being recognized. And clearly, it's a very serious political issues in many of these countries. And I know the report has not touched on that, and I think it's good actually to hear from Harris and Anna, whether this is something at one stage will be addressed. Okay, so let's collect more views.
Well, we have an intervention from Cairo.
Yes, please.
السلام عليكم. شكرا كلاريسا. طرقت أمر الأراضي للمراعي ومسارات الرعاة الرحل. وقد لاحظت أيضا كما لاحظت كلاريسا أن النظرة الآن عامة في الأرض تنظر إلى الأرض الثابتة وأغلبها الأرض الحضرية، حتى ما يتعلق منها بالأرض الريفية فبتتكلم عن أرض مملوكة لمستخدم واحد أو مجموعة من المستخدمين لمدة متصلة. الشيء اللطيف في مسألة الأراضي الرحل والمسارات الثروة الحيوانية أن الاستخدام تبادلي بين المزارع والراحل. فالمزارع يستخدم الأرض في فترة محددة ثم يجمع محصوله، هو صاحب الحق في الاستخدام، يخرج من الأرض في تاريخ محدد لتحضر الحيوانات والرعاة ويعبر هذه الأرض ويستخدم بواقي المحصول وما تبقى منه ويحصل تخصيب للأرض واستخدام لها لفترة محددة قد تبلغ يوما وحتى 3 أسابيع أو شهر ثم ينتقل إلى مكان آخر. فيجب أن تستصحب هذه الميكانيكية وهذه العملية التفاعلية في دراساتنا لمسألة الأرض والحقوق. هناك حقوق موقوتة وهي مستمرة لمئات السنين، فلا نستطيع أن نحدد ملكية الأرض للمزارع فيحصل النزاع، ولا نقول أن هذه الأرض مملوكة للراعي ويحدث النزاع. ويجب أن نستفيد من هذه التجارب لأنها تجارب مستدامة واستمرت لمئات السنين ما لم نتدخل نحن بعمليات التحضر والتخطيط الحضري وبناء البنية التحتية التي تقطع مسارات هذه الحيوانات، وبعضها تسببت فيه التغيرات المناخية وقلة الموارد المائية وزيادة الثروة الحيوانية. ولكن أوصي بأن تستصحب هذه المسألة. أعتقد أن منظمة الأغذية والزراعة لديها بعض الدراسات في هذا المجال، يجب أن يحصل تكامل بينها وبين ما نقوم به من دراسات لملكية الأرض. شكرا.
Excellent. Thank you. This is a very important point, and I know the report has not touched on that. Okay. Any other comment, intervention from the floor?
While if the time allows, I would like to make a small comment.
Yes, Chair, please.
Rafiq and Clarissa were mentioning the fact that there are a lot of laws, and as I'm coming from Iraq and I have made a study about refugees in Syria, I can say in these countries, when you have a big influx of refugees and when you have a very big displacement and conflicts, repetitive conflicts, the only way is to produce more laws to try to control everything. And these laws or these repetitive laws are creating chaos on the ground because there are no policy impact evaluation, neither in Iraq nor in Syria, and also in some of the Arabic countries. And due to the failing impact evaluation, the implementation of these laws is really hard on the ground because you have 3 or 4 laws that can be implemented for one case. This is making the situation very hard, even in the courts, to take a decision, and therefore land disputes and land issues in general takes in average 2 years in the court to be solved. And I believe this point is one of the things that the World Bank need to focus on in their report about the region, because as we are facing this population growth and the rapid urbanization and the multiple displacement, this will become a major issue in the future that won't be easy to solve if not tackled at the moment. Thank you very much, Wael.
Okay, excellent, Shahid. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question or intervention. Before we close. Okay, so it looks
from Cairo.
Okay, please.
No, there are no more comments.
No more comments from Cairo. Okay, excellent. So let's go to Anna and Harris, to respond and say final words before we close. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, from my side, it's mostly to thank all of the participants for the great interventions and great comments. As I mentioned, on one side, I think we're glad to hear that, at least most of the issues that we've presented today, it's a summary for sure, but it seems like, this resonates from what we hear also, both from the participants in Cairo, as also, online. So this is, I think it's good to hear. We've heard a lot, I think, on the issue of the disputes. The issue of accumulation of the laws to resolve problems. So these are really important issues that we'll try to give the right attention into the report. And, it's also maybe a plea, if anybody has some interesting examples, and let alone what we know that data information is really scarce, but anything you think it's worth really highlighting, please reach out. We'll be happy really to study it and maybe incorporate in the report. So let me stop here. Thank you again to everybody.
Okay, Harris, anything from your side before we close?
Thank you, Anna. I would say just one quick thing. Listening people talking about conflicting rights of the pastoralists, etc. I mean, it comes to my mind that the diversity of rights is something very important. And I see that Clarissa is connected, so she will be very happy to hear me saying that the work that GLTN did in the past on the continuum of tenure rights is, of course, still very relevant, and it's something that we still have in our minds. And of course, our report is not going just to look, just at formal ownership property, but we're also very much aware of the importance of recognizing also those type of customary rights. It's not just through the conflict, but how to integrate them in the system of tenure. So this is something important, and we need to do a little bit more in terms of the ongoing research, actually, to document ourselves on those issues. And if you have suggestions, regarding the specific topic, as Anna just mentioned, please email to us. We can have, a Skype chat, or if you can, mention some literature that we should be aware of. It would be really, really useful for the report. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. So in addition to the discussion, we had a few chats as well, going on. I'm sure Anna and Harris are following up these chats. But as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the first, of series of consultation we're going to do, in the next few months. This one is really the general one, and probably we will have more specific areas for consultations. You will hear from us, on these consultations. It was very informative for me, very important, point you raised. And I really would like to suggest that this conversation continues. If you have, additional information and additional comments, suggestion for the report, please contact directly, Harris and Anna. I think their email was included in the presentation, which you saw, but also it will be distributed to all of you. So at the end, let me thank Harris and Anna for the presentation. Thanks, Roberta, for giving the opening remarks. But really, the big thanks goes to all of you who participated, in this session.